Hi everyone, and welcome to my latest webinar. This time focusing on the issues of workplace banter, bullying and harassment, and what the issues can cause, and what, as managers and business owners, we need to think about doing to protect our people, and goes without saying, to protect our businesses. This webinar is going to last around 20 to 30 minutes, depends on the interaction. We've got a Q&A at the end. And it's a précis of a banter and harassment training course that we deliver to many of our customers, valued customers, which is around 3 hours long. And you'll perhaps see as we go through this, the reasons why it's important to communicate and raise awareness throughout our workforces. But I believe from today, you will go away with a good understanding of the issues around, particularly around bullying and harassment and how it can occur. We're going to touch a little bit on banter and the laws that surround us, and really look at some of the consequences of what can go wrong when it does. It's really great to see so many people here today. I'm intrigued who's in Matlock, because I'm in sunny Derbyshire today and not too far from Matlock, so I'll be having a look with interest to see who's there. But it's really great to see so many familiar faces and some new ones. For those who don't know me yet, I'm Andrew. I head up the employment law team here at THSP and have been a lawyer in the field of employment and HR for around 15 years. While I have day-to-day employment obligations as a director here at THSP, I've also been in business as an owner and as a director elsewhere. So I truly can empathise and understand the issues that go on in workplaces up and down the country. The effects of adverse banter or even harassment and bullying can have significant effects on anyone. And over the next 20-30 minutes, we're going to discuss the salient issues in this very subjective, emotive, yet topical workplace problem. It's really peaking on our casework at the minute. Bullying and harassment cases are really coming through, particularly with people who believe they've been dismissed for reasons that they'd raised in the workplace. Firstly, let me say that there is no hard and fast rules as to what will constitute harassment or bullying in one person's view. Yes, there are some laws about it, which we're going to discuss, but it's entirely subjective and it's the sole emotional response to comments, actions, styles and cultures within our workplaces that may cause that same person the distresses I'm going to talk about this morning. Reaction to such emotional changes and exposures often may change throughout the day, throughout the week, throughout the month, as stresses and anxieties in that individual are lived out. One may have no knowledge of a work colleague's personal stresses that may make them less receptive, and in fact may be more vulnerable to what on other occasions may have been seen as a friendly gesture. Such stresses may relate to circumstances, for instance, financial, medical, relationship, or personal trauma or grief. Take the time to consider the environments around you and your colleagues' feelings, as it is each of us who can truly influence a reduction in bullying and harassment in the workplace. But first, can I ask, in this very private poll, can I ask if anyone who's ever considered themselves to have been a victim of bullying or harassment through their employer, just to complete this poll that Emma's going to launch in a couple of seconds. This is completely private and we'll only see the percentage results. So it's a yes if you have experienced it, or no if not. I'll give you 15 seconds to respond if you can. Okay, let's just give it another 5 seconds. Okay, I'm just going to publish the results. There we go. It's staggering. It's concerning. That is that possibly 19 out of the 20 odd people that have voted have either directly, knowingly suffered harassment or bullying in the workplace, and some may have experienced it. And as we go through this, you might know a little bit more. I think this is a real picture and expectation. I'm not going to share any details, but I suffered bullying when I was in my very early days from a senior manager. When I looked at the facts of it in later life, I can understand the circumstances, how I felt at the time, and what that might constitute in terms of law and protection. So I just want to start. If you have a look at this statement on the page, it's quite generic, it's quite simple, but it covers some very simple, basic, important facts. And I asked the question, do you have something that looks like this in your business? If not, drop me an email at andrew.wilson@thsp.co.uk, and I'll let you have a policy, a bullying and harassment policy, to thank you for attending today. So using the chat function, if you could just drop in there, if a yes, if you have a policy, or no, if you don't. And again, I'm not going to make any judgments here. So while I'm just talking through that, if you could kindly just put your thoughts into the chat function. So the question is, why do you need a policy? All employers should have a policy stating what they would do to avoid harassment and bullying. The purpose of the policy says that bullying and harassment is wholly unacceptable, where every employee is treated with respect and dignity, and no one employee feels threatened or intimidated. Good practice and case law dictates as well that it should also say that it will provide some form of training to its staff. That doesn't mean sitting them in a classroom for 3 hours, but it means inducting them, coaching them, advising them of what the company's expectations are, back to back with what the policy says. A good policy should say it's for harassers, that it's all intended as good practice and to raise awareness and to eradicate this misconception and unknowing about what bullying and harassment can be. It also says that management will be fully aware of the policy and to make every effort to ensure unfair treatment, harassment, or bullying doesn't occur. So why would you do that? Well, it's like to respect its people and make sure people are respected and that they go home happy and wealthy and have a good mental well-being. But further and deeper than that, employers have a vicarious duty to protect its staff from harassment. The Equality Act, section 109, says that anything done by a person in the course of their employment must be treated as also done by their employer. So in its defense, the employer must demonstrate that it took all reasonable steps to prevent its employees from doing that thing or from doing anything of that described as harassment. And we'll talk about those descriptions in a second. Tribunals, sadly, if it gets to tribunal, they will interrogate the practice versus the policy if it comes to a court hearing. So let's just have a look at a few definitions here. Firstly, what does Collins say about bullying? As per your bullying and harassment policy, bullying is defined as behavior that can characterize or be characterized as offensive, intimidating, malicious, or insulting. It can be an abusive or misuse of power intended to undermine or humiliate. ACAS defines bullying as behavior from a person or group that's unwanted by that individual and makes them feel uncomfortable. And it gives them feelings like being frightened, less respected or put down, that they've been made fun of or upset. Whereas harassment on the other side, many people use the term bullying and harassment interchangeably. However, because in recent years, the law on sex, race, and other types of discrimination has explicitly recognized harassment as a category of unlawful discrimination. There's now a tendency to use harassment specifically in this context. Harassment is defined again in the Equality Act, but at section 26, when somebody behaves in a way which offends or distresses, that it creates an intimidating, hostile, degrading, humiliating, or offensive environment to that person. Some examples are spreading malicious rumors or insulting somebody by words or behavior, by copying memos that are critical about someone or others who don't need to know about it, in ridiculing or demeaning someone, picking on them or setting them up to fail. So as we can see there, the definitions between harassment and bullying are quite similar. And soon we'll just explore what makes these different. There is another phrase that often gets thrown into the mix at this point, and that is banter. At this point, banter is often gets considered hand in hand with bullying and harassment. Banter is defined as the playful and friendly exchange of teasing remarks, repartee, quips, wisecracks, and the like. The main purpose of banter is to make or deepen a connection between each other. If you watch a group of friends out socially, you can see them interacting, and you'll probably hear lots of banter going on. In general, the better you know someone, the safer it is to tease them. I want to give you an example only this weekend. While I was on the way to watch the mighty Leicester Tigers at Welford Road this weekend, I was on the train with a friend, and somebody who we know on the train, before my mate had got there, asked me where my dad was. My mate's 6 years older than me. That made for an afternoon of banter, of jokes, as you can well imagine. Can you see how banter thrives when there is familiarity and trust? I'm sure we all can. But who makes the decision as to when this can happen and when is the line crossed? Go back to that earlier slide. It really comes down to the individual, the experiences, and how they're feeling at that time. How do we consider this? Well, we've got to be aware. We've got to make our own judgments as to what that line in the sand is. Are we going to become offensive? So let's just define what the difference between harassment and bullying is. Harassment, as we've defined, is a form of discrimination. If it impacts for those reasons that I've discussed, that it's derogatory, it's intimidating, it creates a hostile environment. But if it also impacts directly on one of the 9 protected characteristics defined within the Equality Act, those characteristics are age, race, disability, religious or belief, sex, gender assignment, pregnancy and maternity, sexual orientation, and marriage or civil partnerships. So we start to piece together if the banter turns over to be harassing, if it becomes hostile and undignified and intimidatory because of one of these, any one of these protected characteristics, then it can be seen to be discriminatory and an act of harassment may have occurred. So there is a plethora of law affecting the affording rights, protection, and damages against harassment and bullying claims. We have anti-discrimination and human rights laws fighting against harassment, and employment laws affording protection against unfair and constructive dismissal. There are some subtle differences to consider between these elements. Equality laws are afforded at all times. There is no need to be employed, let alone have any period of service, whereas dismissal laws generally only protect those with more than 2 years in continuous employment. The Harassment Act, as you can see on the list, finally derived from the Jill Dando and Susie Lamplugh cases back in the 90s and early noughties, where they were both tragically murdered after their harassment by their perpetrators who could not be stopped in law for the conduct and the acts that they were following. The Harassment Act is a criminal piece of legislation, whereas the Equality Act and the Employment Rights Act are civil pieces of legislation. So I just want to give you some perspective if it goes wrong, if you, as employers and business owners and managers, that we've not done what we should be doing in terms of putting rules in place, reviewing and amending our cultures, and stepping on problems as they occur. Harassment claims can go to tribunal. They go to the employment tribunal. And to put some perspective on this, it takes up a huge amount of time and stress and cost that goes into preparing for the hearing. They shouldn't be taken lightly and have been known to last up to 10 days. That's 10 days in the courtroom alone. What effect and detriment would have this on your business, on the rest of your staff, and you as a business owner? So we look at the consequences and what effect harassment, or is it fair to say the lesser degree of bullying, could have on someone? I don't know. It's not only for the good of the victim that the employers create cultures and systems to stave off workplace bullying and harassment. The impact of both cause long-standing health issues, loss of demeanour and status and confidence, not only through work, but socially too. Harassment can have an indirect on employees who witness bullying or other colleagues of other colleagues and may experience adverse health effects too. Researchers recently found that in a work psychology, that even without experiencing direct bullying themselves, staff who observed the behaviour endured future declines in their work-related well-being, including feeling more depressed. I'm not aware of any case law at the minute, but with discrimination laws, there are opportunities to bring claims of direct, i.e. it's affected you directly, or indirect discrimination. Indirect discrimination relates to workplace issues, cultural issues, where other people or a group of people have been mistreated. For employers to defend themselves against such claims, they need to demonstrate that they have put robust policies and practices in place, and that these have been put to test, that their effectiveness is reviewed on a regular basis, and that all staff have been briefed and trained in preventing harassment. It might be good to do a survey once in a while, not too regularly, but perhaps every couple of years, to see what the cultures, what the expectations within the workplace are. Employers are liable for acts of harassment in the workplace, irrespective of whether the harassment was done with the employer's knowledge or approval. Lots of harassment cases centre around office parties, you know, those that particularly happen around December. Ignorance is not a defence, but is likely to be vicariously liable for an act of unlawful discrimination by an employee if it can prove that it took all reasonable practical steps to prevent the act from being committed by the employee. For a business, bad PR and damaged customer relationships can result from harassment claims and have a profound and irreversible effect on your business. I know many government contracts require a disclosure at pre-qualification and tenders for any claims that have been taken to tribunal and found successful. I spoke to a prospective client just the other week whose business was sent under last year due to a successful harassment claim. The awards are high, the ramifications, the consequences of this are very serious and should be taken with seriousness. There is another party that's involved in this, and this is the alleged perpetrator. And bullying and harassment, according to most disciplinary policies, could result in dismissal. And again, for this to be fair, the employer needs to be clear about its expectations. So in your disciplinary and your bullying and harassment policies, The processes and how allegations will be treated need to be set out. But for anyone losing their job as a result, it is likely to be remorseful. It's not for just for the injured party, then for themselves and their families. The extent of the grief they feel and how it plays out depends on the individual's reliance on their work environment for their sense of worth as well as for their social needs. If work is their entire life, it can be devastating. Now, that necessarily doesn't change the course of action, but it needs to be considered. So what, some might say? Well, at the end of the day, we're dealing with human lives and all considerations need to be taken into account. We're towards the end of this webinar, and here is our final question. Let me ask you now, how do you feel about bullying and harassment? Are you confident that you're doing everything you can to minimize the potential for bullying and harassment in your workplace? Again, this is completely private and we'll only see the percentages. So please, can you give you a yes or a no to give me an idea of how you now feel? I'll give you another 15 seconds and to respond if you can, please. Just another 5 seconds. Okay, Emma, can we put the results up, please? There we go. We've got quite a few people there who are unsure about what they need to do. If they've got measures in place, have they got a problem in the workplace? Listen, we're here to help. We can have a discussion about this and put some tools into place. Some might be quick in terms of a policy or some cultural development and training for the workforce, whereas others might only be seen over a period of time if we do an assessment or survey of the workforce. Thank you all for participating, and thank you everyone for attending and taking part. So I'm going to have a look now into the chat function. There's nothing in the Q&A at the minute, but I'm going to have a look in the chat function to see if there are any questions. But if there are any questions, comments, or observations about what you've heard today, then please let them know. So what are the first steps for assessment? Adela, we've got some questions that we can put out on a private Survey Monkey or Teams Teams forms or something like that. There are a dozen or so questions, and you know, health and safety department and team are accustomed to dealing with stress and cultures within workplace as well as ourselves. So we've got something we can help you with. Thanks for your comments, Rowan. Think of working in the army, some schools. Yeah, in particular, you get these civil servant contract or civilian contracts going into public sector, MOD, police, government contracts. You really need to be thinking about your statements, your policies, your evidence that you've got to say that you take bullying and harassment really seriously, and you've got some tangible evidence to demonstrate that. Scrolling up. Human rights and harassment laws, Roshan, absolutely. Through the turmoil of Brexit that we've all endured over the last 5 or 6 years, it's still really crystal clear that we're not removing or dropping or changing any of the laws that have bound us in from the European Union over the last 30 or 40 years. So it's imperative that human rights laws and those that have shaped and molded our laws like the Equality Act are still taken with utmost seriousness. Okay. Rodney, I'm not surprised your bullying and harassment policy looks a little bit like the one I showed. Sarah, do you want to drop me an email and I'll happily send you over a format that you can have a look at? Okay. There's nothing else. Oh, 8 new messages. Let's go back to the bottom. Where should you go if people you have issued with the decision makers for your organization and you have no HR professional? Where should you go for people you have issues with? Yeah, a difficult one. You should be able to go to, this is Charlotte's question. It's a really good question. If you feel that you can't go any higher in the organization, then you should at least have a grievance policy or procedure set out, which is probably your only route to follow. Otherwise, you could contact ACAS. There is a process called early conciliation, and ACAS can intervene and try to broker, mediate a dispute or an issue between the employer and employee if there is nobody that the employee feels that they can go to within the organization. So I think, Charlotte, the right way to go would be to contact ACAS or the Citizens Advice Bureau in the first instance. Thanks, Kate. I think you got the same kind of gist with that as well. Natalie's asked if we, Emma, can we unmute people? Natalie would like to ask a question.
Yeah, I'll do that now. I'll just unmute you now, Natalia.
How's that?
Oh, can you hear me?
I can, yeah. Thanks, Natalia. Thanks for putting your hand up and yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Andrea. I just thought it's a little bit long to type and I can miss the time as well. Please, can I ask a question? If it's one of, if it's head of department, constantly ignoring emails of another manager, emails with us providing some, with requests to provide some information, and not just once, twice, but it's all the time, ignoring that emails. And if it's completely isolated department, making this manager not just welcome to come to that area, but making completely feel very uncomfortable and isolated, would that be counted as a harassment or as a bullying at some point? Do I have to do something as a HR manager? I did try to speak both parts, but it looked like the one part cannot understand why it's a situation like that, because like manager saying he's doing everything to support business, while another one is just a stubborn leadership style, something like that, I would say.
Yeah, I think first and foremost, whether it's bullying or harassment, the grievance policy needs to be considered, raised to management above them if possible, to ideally informally resolve the issue before it becomes a formality. But then the question is it bullying or harassment? It really depends on why the manager is ignoring or dismissing those emails. Are they setting somebody up to fail? Are they being hostile, intimidating? Are they being rude to the individual? Or are they doing it because of a protected characteristic? That would define whether it is bullying or if it's harassment. I don't think there is a lesser offence between bullying and harassment, and both should be seen with seriousness. What I wanted today is just differentiate what the law affords, and obviously the risks of a breach of harassment or breach of bullying, on the other hand, might bring to an organisation. So I think it's follow your grievance policy. If you haven't got one, again, I can help you with that, or go to ACAS. ACAS will, on the website, ACAS website, the code of practice for disciplinary and grievances there for everybody to say, and it sets out the steps that somebody should ideally follow before it becomes litigious, becomes a tribunal claim or anything like that, to try and resolve the workplace dispute. And that may involve raising concerns higher in the structure of the organisation, if that's possible and feasible to do so.
Thank you.
Thank you. Cool, thanks for showing that, Emma.
That's all right. I think we've got one more hand up if you're happy for me to unmute somebody.
Sure.
Yeah, Adela, just allowing you to talk now.
Adela, are you there? There you go.
Thank you so much. I think the question raised by somebody in the chat group about the leadership and how do you influence the decision maker is a quite a fundamental one, given the circumstances and the environment we're in, because it's middle of pandemic or at the end of pandemic, or whatever stance anybody wants to take. And how does one manage the workforce in regards to that? And I'll give you one simple example from this morning. Somebody displaying flu-like symptoms, asked to request to go home. She took it as that we were forcing her to go, whereas we were saying, look, it's in the interest that you stay home, do whatever you can. If you can work from home, but not from the office, because we then all potentially will end up with the flu if it is just the flu. So how does one manage that from the top? And obviously a team leads or department heads are not able to enforce that decision onto them, and it requires a top level manager to walk in and say, guy, come on, please, there you are, and wait till you're better.
Yeah, I think any decision, organizational decision, needs to be considered and consulted within the management board. That might be the board of directors, the management team, and that decision needs to be communicated down with the reasons for that clearly and concisely to everybody in the workforce. That in itself will eradicate any potential for intimidation or feeling of rejection or less favorable treatment or anything like that, because you can show that consideration has been given and it's been communicated concisely and fairly and openly to everybody in the workforce, so everybody has had the same communication. It becomes much more difficult to defend and consider when it becomes isolated, and when one of the other panel attendees mentioned that it can be quite subjective, and the manager, and Natalia was just saying that it's one manager ignoring somebody's emails. That's quite isolated and quite direct. But if the company, the organization, have made a unilateral decision and communicated that consistently throughout the organization, backed up with, in terms of COVID and the COVID rules, backed up with government policy, then I don't think you've got any problem whatsoever. You've done everything you can within this magic word of reasonableness to fulfill all your duties and obligations. The employee might not like it in this case, because you're sending them home and they might just get SSP instead of a day's pay, but you're doing what the government is advising everybody to do at this time if they become symptomatic.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you for that clearance.
Thanks, Adela. Okay, thank you. I think that's it. Emma, can you see anyone else? Anything further coming up?
Can't see any more questions. If anybody does have any more questions, now would be the time to quickly put those in. If not, we can wrap up.
Nothing coming through. Thank you all for attending. It's been a real pleasure. I've really enjoyed it this morning. Thank you.
Great. So yeah, thank you everybody for coming. Have a great rest of your day. We've recorded this session, so we'll be sending it out afterwards. If anybody has any questions or anything that they want to speak to Andrew about, we can arrange a discovery call after this. And if you're a customer, you have his details anyway. So great. Thank you very much, guys. Enjoy your day.